Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Real people. Assalamu alaikum. People whose reality I am not entirely certain about. That is to say, virtual people. Welcome back. It's a pleasure to continue the discussion after two very interesting presentations this morning. So I'm only going to talk for a few minutes, and I'm going to talk about an issue that has been brought up particularly with the wide usage of ChatGPT and similar services, but there's no really difference in the issue between what platform's doing it, and that is the question of copyright. And this is going to build a bit on Boumedien's ideas or criticisms of the quantification of modernity, are transferring things into numbers, products, commodities, and so forth. So I'm not going to be prescriptive today. I'm not going to tell you what we should or shouldn't do or how we should or shouldn't do it. But I'm just going to invite us and us over there to consider our assumptions about copyright, knowledge, ownership, and so forth, and education. Insofar as a lot of what I've heard has been what I would consider to be reactionary. That is to say, a lot of people will say, I won't use this or that because it breaks copyright or because it's making things more difficult for authors or whatever. But we don't actually always stop to think about who those assumptions are serving or where they're coming from. So I'm just going to break this down a bit. The first question one can ask is, what is the purpose of copyright? And I can think of a few purposes that it carries out. Now, probably the most noble purpose is to avoid someone stealing your work and then claiming it as their own for the glory and honor. Because that's very infuriating when someone takes your work, and that might have happened to some of you, and they publish it under their own name, and then they're giving these grand lectures about their work, or they're getting promotions or whatever. I think we can all agree that's unethical and infuriating, and it is excellent that we, in theory, have some legal protection in that area. But that, of course, is not all that copyright law does nowadays. It also allows someone to make a personal profit. In theory, I publish my book. This is totally theoretical for academics. How much money do we ever make on our work? But let's say I write a novel or a cookbook. I might make some personal profits on that. And many people would say, okay, that's fair. You made it so you can take some money from it. I might also be able to make those profits into a sort of estate. So maybe if I write a really best-selling book, like, I don't know, Harry Potter 2 or something, or Lord of the New Set of Rings, maybe it can be such a bestseller that I could actually pass it on to descendants. And at this point, I think it's worth considering, is this still in the realm of what is necessarily fair? Is it a property that one passes on to one's descendants, like a house or a car or something? I mean, what if it's like an enormous amount of money and rights and so forth? But then again, would it be fair not to have that? It's something to consider. And then lastly, we get to what we generally have in the academic world, and that is copyright and a lot of the fees associated with accessing this material really just floats the industry. That is to say, if I write an academic article, I'm unlikely to get any money for it. Alhamdulillah. I may even have to pay to publish it, and either an institution will pay for access to it, or I may be asked to pay exorbitant amounts of money for it. And that is a fair amount of the material that is being reproduced by certain systems. And at this point, I think most of us would agree that that is somehow unfair. And I'm not saying the system doesn't need money. You know, I understand universities need money, publishers need money. So I'm not saying you can just get rid of that entirely, but most of us understand there is something imbalanced going on, and yet all of this is lumped under copyright. The other thing I'm going to observe regarding copyright is a lot of people have conflicting ideas, which is completely okay, but I think we should consider our conflicting ideas. On the one hand, who here has never shared a PDF? No, so no downloading your PDFs online, no WhatsApping the people. And for academic works, we might, it might be because some people genuinely can't afford the material if they don't have the institutional access. So there's sort of an excuse that copyright is important, but I'm excused because I can't afford it. So it's a sort of, way of excusing the individual or convenience or whatever it happens to be. But the point is, somewhere inside, a lot of us, I think, feel that writing and knowledge should be freely available. They shouldn't be restricted to people who can afford them, whether that's direct payment or maybe being in a country where you can access and purchase certain materials, or being at an institution which has those database accesses. While on the other hand, a lot of us do vehemently defend the system as it is nowadays. So that's an inner conflict that I think is worth examining. And I pointed out at the beginning that I'm not going to be prescriptive, but what I'm saying is sometimes having knee-jerk reactions to these corporations are taking advantage of copyrighted materials doesn't necessarily reflect everything that's going on. Especially because, I'll go back to ChatGPT, as much as it may be borrowing on being fed with and even outputting copyrighted materials, it is also essentially doing so in a much more democratic manner than the material is available nowadays, since anyone with the internet in theory can access it and actually get the output to them versus a restricted group of people in the beginning. So how are we going to balance those things in the future? How are we going to balance the ideal, which I think a lot of us would also consider to be an Islamic ideal, that knowledge should be shared, versus the ideal that knowledge has become a commodity and a property? This leads to education. Yes, another big issue or problem we've been having nowadays, as some of you know, since we've got a contingent from the Islamic College here, but I'm not pointing fingers at us because we're certainly not any worse off than anyone else, is students using these services to write essays for themselves and then getting good grades. And this makes us angry because it's unfair. Well, that's actually not why it makes me angry, but because I do work at the Islamic College, we're a little bit different in what we do. But let's say someone is going to the University of California, Los Angeles, and they're getting an undergraduate degree in biology. And I picked the United States on purpose because you have to take more general education classes there that may have nothing to do with your degree and you don't care about. Or you may or may not care about them. So let's say someone is taking an anthropology class, but their degree is in mathematics. They don't really care. They're not going to use it in their future life. And they use ChatGPT so they can pass their anthropology class and get on to other things in life. This makes us angry because it's not fair. Why is it not fair? The reason why it's not fair, among the reasons why it's not fair, is essentially we've converted education into a quantified system of learning. So you get a letter or a number. In the US, you would get a grade point average. You get some sort of numerical measure of your learning, which then is supposed to convert into units for a class. So you get a numbered learning, which converts into a degree, which is supposed to convert into a salary. So basically, we have the quantification of knowledge and learning in the university system today, which is supposed to convert into your future knowledge, the resources that are allocated to you. So of course, it's not fair if someone uses ChatGPT to pass their anthropology class because they're going to be cheating away to a higher salary. This is what happens when we start to reduce knowledge, writing, and learning to numbers. And by the way, I don't intend to conflate knowledge and writing, but we understand, especially from the presentations this morning, that there is a relationship between the two. So maybe that's where we need to stop and think. If in some cases universities have just become factories for financial productivity, if you will, maybe something has gone missing in the realm of knowledge. Maybe something has gone missing in the realm of writing. Why do we write? Why do students write? And yes, even at the Islamic College, there is a pragmatic aspect. The world being what it is, we need some way to measure learning and something to build a mark on. God forbid we don't give you guys marks, we have to give you marks because it's socially expected and legally expected and so forth. But that sort of functionality of writing, if you will, which promotes a quantification of learning and allows the measuring of knowledge in a person, or, nowadays we can, give ChatGPT written exams too, is not really what the point is. Okay, there are several points of writing, but that's not what the ideal point is when it comes to learning or exploration. That is to say, there might be many reasons why I write something. There could be a functional reason, like one of my students yesterday wrote a very ardent letter to challenge his parking ticket fee. Because he didn't pay the meter or whatever. That's a functional piece of writing, and very few people would say it matters whether he personally writes it or his wife writes it or ChatGPT writes it or copy paste or whatever, because it just has a job to do and it gets done. But ideally, when it comes to learning, there's a couple other things that happen when we are writing. One of them you mentioned when you were talking about the ay'alama bil qalam, and then you were talking about learning through the pen. And that is ideally, when we are writing, it is a process of discovery through using the pen. It will happen if you actually repeat things out loud enough too, but especially in the writing process, on one level, it's a cognitive process, which enables us to put ideas together and discover new things that we did not hitherto discuss before. That's why sometimes when we write our essays, we figure out what we're writing about after we're done with them, right? That's why you always tell the students to take the bottom of the essay and put it at top. And these are discoveries we would not have made if we hadn't actually gone through the process and something happened through the integration of the aspect of writing that we're using and the knowledge basis to produce something which is genuinely new that we didn't have before. And also, many people in the past, at least, would have said there's a spiritual aspect to writing, that there is a sort of guidance, if you will, or inspirational aspect, whether it's writing, art, and so forth, that we open ourselves up to things that may be a little bit, beyond the facts in the textbook, to also gain a better understanding of things as well. That's kind of when you're really in the flow of writing and you're just coming up with stuff. And I'm not saying you end up as prophets or something, but this is part of what goes on when people are engaging in the act of writing. And these are things that ChatGPT cannot do for you. I'm not even going to wager what it does and doesn't do, but it can't do that for you. It can't do that for the students in the anthropology class. And this is really what writing should do in an educational context. Or most contexts that are above the functional. It's not about productivity and productivity culture and making something that has a quantified mark. But ideally, it is an exercise in discovery on many levels and making something new, and most importantly, in the new in the mind of the writer or the author themselves. And then, of course, what it sparks in everyone else is different. So that is more the purpose of writing. And if that were really emphasized as the purpose in more of a holistic educational system, which wasn't so focused on numbers and outputs and so forth, and that treated people as human beings rather than just cogs in the university machine to be passed or failed, then definitely I think that would, first of all, elevate the standard of what we are doing, but also it would bring in some of the more traditional aspects that were being discussed, which may have gotten lost in the sort of factory education culture that we have. So I think that as we are criticizing the use of these machines, and I do, I do mention it when students use ChatGPT. I'm not saying I'm, not caring about it, but as we are criticizing it, I think it's important to look at the underlying questions of why. And that also gives a sense of why sometimes writing that is done by ChatGPT is not quite as interesting as writing that is done by a human being. Because when the human being does it, there's something of their voice and their self in it. But the more that it goes back to the machine, it loses that, and our eyes start to gloss over. That's one way I know students have been using ChatGPT. My eyes start to gloss over the paragraph. And that is something we are bringing to the process as well. And this goes beyond the question of plagiarism and fairness and copyright and so forth. So I think these are two aspects in which we can reconsider the way we are responding to these technologies, which also question some of the assumptions about knowledge being a commercial product or a property that can be passed on from one person to another, even if the other person had nothing to do with making it in the first place. And instead look at what is the point and what do we get actually out of knowledge and writing, and also think more about what do we as human beings want for the future with respect to the democratization of knowledge versus the restriction of knowledge, and how do we balance that with fairness? I will let you all think of the answers, and maybe I will hear them in a few hours, inshallah, in the other presentations.
Thank you.